The ladder of escalation, navigating civil conflict. Dedication. To those caught between justice and peace, who must decide whether to press forward or step back when the stakes become human lives. Preface. Civil conflict rarely begins with gunfire. It begins with words, with feelings of being unheard, with small acts of defiance that grow when met with indifference or repression. This book presents a structured model of how such conflicts escalate, and just as importantly, how they can be de-escalated, using the metaphor of a ladder. Inspired by Herman Cahn's Cold War framework, but adapted entirely to internal societal strife, this ladder contains 10 rungs. Each rung represents a qualitatively different level of intensity, commitment, risk, and societal damage. At every step, the participants face the same fundamental question: should we go higher, or should we try to come down? The decision is never purely strategic. It is shaped by emotion, ideology, group dynamics, perceived alternatives, leadership quality, external actors, and the behavior of the opposing side. This book attempts to make those decision points more visible and more deliberate. For each rung you will find a clear description of what that level looks like in practice, representative historical and contemporary examples, indicators that continuing to escalate may be rational from the perspective of achieving core objectives, indicators that de-escalation or at least pausing has become the wiser course, and practical considerations for actors on both sides of the conflict, whether state and security forces, opposition movements, or civilian populations caught in the middle. The ladder is descriptive, not prescriptive. Climbing it is easy, descending it is hard. Most civil conflicts that reach the higher rungs do not end in total victory for either side. They end in exhaustion, partition, massive displacement, decades of bitterness, or negotiated settlements that could have been reached much earlier at far lower cost. The central message is simple. Almost every society that has avoided civil war did so by keeping most grievances on the lower rungs long enough for political mechanisms, economic improvements, cultural shifts, or elite bargains to address them. Almost every society that experienced full-scale civil war failed to do so. The 10 rungs overview. Phase 1: rhetorical and symbolic conflict, low personal risk, high legitimacy potential. Rung 1: peaceful disagreement and public criticism. Rung 2: organized public advocacy and symbolic campaigns. Rung 3: mass peaceful mobilization such as marches, vigils, boycotts. Phase 2: disruptive but principled resistance, medium personal risk, legitimacy still contestable. Rung 4: sustained civil disobedience. Rung 5: economic disruption and infrastructure interference such as strikes, blockades, targeted sabotage without injury. Rung 6: defensive posturing and limited self-protection such as arming for defense, creation of parallel institutions. Phase 3: kinetic conflict, high personal and societal risk, legitimacy rapidly erodes for whoever is seen as aggressor. Rung 7: sporadic targeted violence. Rung 8: sustained low-intensity armed actions. Rung 9: open insurrection and contested control of territory. Rung 10: full-scale civil war and attempts at mutual destruction. Rung 1: peaceful disagreement and public criticism. This is where almost every modern civil conflict begins. Individuals and small groups say, in public or semi-public forums, that something is deeply wrong and must change. Characteristics include speech, writing, art, memes, petitions with modest signatures, criticism directed at policies, institutions, or individuals holding power, no coordinated attempt to physically disrupt normal life. Participants still largely accept the basic legitimacy of the system while demanding reform. When to escalate, move toward Rung 2. Repeated, good faith attempts at dialogue receive either silence, dismissal, or bad faith responses. Evidence accumulates through data, whistleblowers, court rulings that the grievance is systemic rather than isolated. Public sentiment measurement tools such as polls, social media engagement, petition growth show the concern is spreading beyond the initially affected group. When to de-escalate or stay here, authorities begin credible dialogue, launch investigations, or make visible policy adjustments. The issue is losing public traction rather than gaining it. Internal divisions within the aggrieved group are emerging and need resolution before broadening action. Examples include early Me Too posts in 2017, initial climate activist blog posts and opinion pieces in the mid-2000s, early online criticism of lockdown policies in 2020 in various countries. Rung 2, organized public advocacy and symbolic campaigns. Now the disagreement becomes structured. Organizations form or existing ones take up the cause. Tactics include coordinated social media campaigns, billboards, large petitions, celebrity endorsements, days of action, symbolic gestures such as kneeling or wearing certain colors, shareholder resolutions, academic conferences, art installations. Characteristics include still entirely legal in most systems, aims to change minds, shift acceptable public discourse, build coalitions, cost to participants remains low such as time, reputation, occasional doxing. When to escalate, symbolic victories occur such as hashtags trend or polls shift but produce zero material policy change. Repression begins such as accounts suspended, protest permits denied for specious reasons, organizers fired or sued. A triggering event dramatically increases salience such as police killing on video, leaked memo, court decision. When to de-escalate, meaningful concessions are offered and appear credible. Coalition starts fracturing over tactics or goals. Public begins to perceive the campaign as harassment rather than legitimate advocacy. Examples include marriage equality advocacy campaigns from 2004 to 2015 in the United States, global anti-apartheid divestment movement in the 1980s, early Fridays for future school strikes. Rung 3, mass peaceful mobilization. Hundreds of thousands or millions move their bodies into public space in coordinated nonviolent fashion. This includes marches, sit-ins at public buildings, encampments in parks or squares, nationwide days of absence from work or school. Characteristics include high visibility, high symbolic power, still overwhelmingly nonviolent though minor scuffles possible, participants accept risk of arrest, tear gas or doxing, legitimacy still very high if violence is avoided. When to escalate, security forces respond with gratuitous violence, creating martyrs and massive sympathy wave. Government doubles down with emergency laws, mass arrests of organizers, internet shutdowns. Parallel institutions begin forming such as people's assemblies, mutual aid networks. When to de-escalate, government offers negotiations with credible representatives, public support plateaus or begins declining, especially middle-class fatigue. Winter, holidays or major cultural events reduce sustainable turnout. Examples include 2019 Hong Kong protests in the early phase, 2020 Belarus post-election marches, India farmers' protests from 2020 to 2021, 1963 March on Washington. Rung 4, sustained civil disobedience. Deliberate, open violation of laws considered unjust, usually with willingness to accept legal consequences. Examples include occupying government buildings, blocking bridges or highways, refusing to disperse, tax resistance, draft resistance. Characteristics include direct confrontation with law enforcement, participants train in nonviolent discipline, moral high ground depends on maintaining nonviolence, arrests become mass rather than occasional. When to escalate, state responds with blanket repression rather than selective arrests, which radicalizes previously moderate participants. International attention surges such as UN statements, foreign media embeds, sanctions threats. Parallel governance structures gain real traction such as people pay taxes to alternative bodies. When to de-escalate, meaningful negotiations begin with movement representatives, courts start issuing favorable rulings, participant burnout or family pressure becomes severe. Examples include Gandhi Salt March and subsequent campaigns, U.S. civil rights lunch counter sit-ins, Extinction Rebellion bridge occupations. Rung 5, economic disruption and infrastructure interference. Actions that impose serious economic pain without directly injuring people. This includes general strikes, port or rail blockades, occupation of critical infrastructure such as oil refineries or mining sites, sophisticated cyber disruption that is non-lethal, coordinated consumer boycotts that threaten major companies. Characteristics include state loses revenue or control over key nodes, middle class begins to feel serious inconvenience or loss, violence still avoidable but temptation rises. When to escalate, economic pain produces elite defections or open splits in ruling coalition, security forces begin refusing orders or defecting in significant numbers. External patrons such as foreign governments or diaspora provide meaningful material support. When to de-escalate, government offers substantial concessions tied to verifiable benchmarks. Collateral damage to vulnerable populations becomes undeniable. Movement starts losing previously supportive media outlets. Examples include 1980 Gdansk shipyard strikes in Poland, 2022 Sri Lanka port and fuel blockades, various anti-pipeline occupations. Rung 6 defensive posturing and limited self-protection, open carrying of weapons for self-defense, formation of neighborhood watch groups, creation of no-go zones or liberated areas, training in small unit tactics, stockpiling supplies, all justified as preparation rather than aggression. Characteristics include symbolic shift from victim to potential combatant, state perceives existential threat, even if no shots fired, arms race dynamic begins. When to escalate, security forces launch large-scale clearing operations against liberated zones. Credible intelligence indicates planned mass arrests or massacres. Significant portion of professional military or police indicates sympathy or neutrality. When to de-escalate, back-channel talks produce credible security guarantees. International peacekeeping or observer missions deploy. Population in contested areas shows strong desire to avoid war. Examples include early stages of Donbass conflict in 2014, armed standoffs during U.S. militia movements, early phases of Syrian uprising. Rung 7 sporadic targeted violence. First deliberate injuries or killings, usually framed as defensive or retaliatory. Examples include sniping at security forces during raids, improvised explosive devices on supply routes, targeted arson of police stations, assassination of particularly hated officials. Characteristics include moral Rubicon crossed, state can now legitimately claim terrorism, recruitment surges on both sides. When to escalate, state responds with collective punishment rather than precision operations. Momentum appears to be decisively shifting, such as large defections, loss of key cities. Foreign governments begin supplying weapons openly. When to de-escalate, humanitarian corridors or safe passage offered, credible third-party mediation begins, casualty ratios become unsustainable for the weaker side. Examples include early IRA campaign in the 1970s, initial FARC actions in Colombia, some phases of PKK activity. Rung 8 sustained low-intensity armed actions. Guerrilla warfare proper. This includes ambushes, sabotage of infrastructure, bombings in civilian areas that increase over time, kidnappings, sustained campaigns to make territory ungovernable. Characteristics include war economy emerges, such as extortion and smuggling, civilians increasingly targeted or used as shields, international humanitarian law violations multiply. When to escalate, conventional military units begin defecting wholesale. External state actors provide air support, heavy weapons, or troops. Capital city becomes visibly insecure. When to de-escalate, stalemate becomes obvious and economically ruinous. War crimes tribunals or ICC investigations gain traction. Population exhaustion reaches critical levels. Examples include Taliban from 2002 to 2021, various Iraqi insurgencies post-2003, Boko Haram peak years. Rung 9 open insurrection and contested control of territory. Large formations fight pitched battles for control of cities, airports, ports, border crossings. Front lines stabilize. Governance splits geographically. Characteristics include conventional military operations appear. Displacement reaches millions. Genocide or ethnic cleansing becomes plausible or actual. When to escalate, one side achieves decisive conventional superiority. Nuclear or chemical weapons enter the discussion. Total victory seems militarily feasible within months. When to de-escalate, stalemate lasts more than 2 years with no decisive shift. Major external powers push for partition or power sharing. Famine or disease deaths exceed combat deaths. Examples include Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939, Syrian War from 2012 to 2018, Ukrainian conflict post-2022 in contested regions. Rung 10 full-scale civil war and attempts at mutual destruction. total societal mobilization, no distinction between front and rear, genocide, carpet bombing, starvation sieges, revenge massacres, goal shifts from governance to annihilation or permanent expulsion of the other side. Characteristics include society fractures into incompatible identity blocks, war crimes become policy, reconstruction timeline measured in generations. When to escalate, almost never rational at this point unless literal extermination is the alternative, only justifiable if survival as a group is at stake and no surrender terms are offered. When to de-escalate, any time both sides still have leadership capable of talking, whenever external great powers are willing to enforce a ceasefire, whenever war aims become clearly unachievable without destroying everything both sides claim to value. Examples include Rwanda in 1994, Bosnia from 1992 to 1995, Yemen post-2015, Sudan, Darfur and current civil war phases. Final thought. The ladder is not destiny. Every rung has exit ramps, some narrow, some wide. The most successful societies are those whose leaders and citizens recognize the rung they are standing on, honestly assess the costs of going higher, and retain enough shared identity to make stepping back possible. Once blood has been deliberately shed in large quantities, the psychological, political, and security barriers to de-escalation become enormous. Therefore, the single most important skill in any polarized society is the ability to keep legitimate grievances on the lower rungs long enough for politics, economics, culture, and time to do their slow, imperfect work. Climb carefully, descend courageously,